maybe for someone who hasn't even heard of that discussion, that God might be temporal now or timeless now, maybe we could unpack that a little bit for the audience.
So yes, let's like just define some basic terms for people.
Yeah.
So everyone wants to say God is eternal. And what it means to be eternal is to exist without beginning and without end. So no one's denying that God's eternal. When you say that God is timeless, you have to add some more claims. We have to do the same thing if you're going to say God's temporal. So if you're going to say, let's start with timelessness. So you're going to say God's eternal. So God exists without beginning, without end. What you add to that is you also say God exists without succession, meaning like God doesn't change, like he doesn't do one thing and then another. And then you're also going to say that God exists without temporal location. So he doesn't exist now or back then or henceforth. And then you're going to say that God does not exist with temporal extension, which means you don't have God persisting from moment to moment to moment to moment. So that's timelessness. So without beginning, without end, without succession, without temporal location, without temporal extension. Now, if you're going to say that God's temporal or in time, what you're saying is God's eternal. So God exists without beginning, without end. Then you add more content. And the more content is God can exist, can undergo succession. So God can do one thing and then another. He can have new moments in his life. And God can have temporal location because he can exist right now. If you think God's omnipresent, then you might want to say God exists right now. And if you think God's omniscient, then you might want to say God can hear my prayers right now. And then you would say God can have temporal extension, meaning God persists from moment to moment to moment. So the whole fact that this universe is persisting from moment to moment is because the omnipresent Lord is sustaining it in existence from moment to moment to moment. So those are the two things. So I guess for the main focus for you would be, if you're going to say God's timeless, do you think you're going to say God cannot change? He cannot have a new moment. He can't do one thing and then another. Whereas if you're going to say God's temporal, he can change. He can do one thing and then another.
Okay.
So those are the two positions, at least.
Yeah. So I don't want to complicate things. So maybe I'm just getting my terminology wrong here. But the way I might say it is, we both want to agree, right, that sans creation God was timeless. Would that be a fair way to say it?
I would deny that. Okay. So there are some, like William Lane Craig's going to say that he's going to agree with you. But there are a lot of other philosophers of time who want to go, Craig, I love you, but I don't know exactly what you're saying at that moment. Like, what is this whole timeless sans creation stuff? And so a lot of people have really pushed back hard on this, including people like, say, like Richard Swinburne or Dean Zimmerman or myself, who want to say God is temporal. Okay. But we're just like, how do you get this timeless state of affairs? And what exactly does that mean that it's not before creation? Because you can't have it before, because then you'd have time. So what's going on here? And since I want to,
yes,
exactly right. So since I want to say that, like I said at the very beginning, I affirmed this weird view that Isaac Newton affirmed, which is that time is an attribute of God. It's one of his essential attributes. So time is the thing that makes change possible. Well, God's the thing that makes change possible. Time is the source of moments. God's the source of moments. Time is the thing that unifies a series of moments into a coherent timeline. Well, God is the thing that providentially arranges a series of moments into a coherent timeline. So I want to say time is an attribute or an aspect of God. So you can't have God being timeless in the same way that you can't have God being, unloving. Like, it's just part of his essential nature.
Okay, so that's
a provocative claim.
No, it's okay. This is awesome because it's new to me. So this will be really fun to explore. So, okay, so what I would have said was what I've heard Craig say, which is God is timeless sans creation. So just without creation, like you said, to avoid the before language. And then he becomes temporal with creation. And I was quite happy with that view. So, but now I'm hearing something different. So I guess maybe one of the worries I or others might have is, if God is always temporal, is this problem of kind of an infinite past, which there have been philosophical arguments against. So how would you kind of respond to that?
Yeah, that's the exact objection to bring up. So if it is the case that there's an infinite series of moments, like an actual infinite series of moments before God creates, you get all sorts of problems. One, I think it's impossible to traverse an infinite. I don't think you can actually undergo an actual infinite number of moments. So you would never get God reaching the point where he could create. Right. That's pretty bad. Another problem is if you get this question that Leibniz brought up against Samuel Clarke. So Clarke affirmed the same view that Newton does and the same view that I do to some extent. So Newton and Clarke would have said there is an earlier moment that God could have created. God could create the universe earlier. And Leibniz goes, well, why didn't God create the universe earlier? Like, what was he doing? He's got to have some good reason for creating it when he does. And Clark's like, well, all the moments of time, they're equally like good. And Leibniz is like, yeah, they're all equally good. So why create this moment instead of at that moment? Seems like God's performing an arbitrary action, which goes against the idea of God being perfectly rational. And I'm like, ooh, yeah, these are two really serious problems. Well, it doesn't matter. Richard Swinburne already solved it for us. So Swinburne's like, well, it's just one moment prior to creation. And did that moment begin to exist? No, the first moment didn't begin to exist. How long does the moment last? No, how long does a moment last is a meaningless question. How long does a particular like event or series of events, like that's a meaningful question, because like temporal length or temporal duration, that's something that takes place over a series of moments. But if you're talking about a single moment, there's no answer to that question. So could God have created sooner? No, there is no sooner. Was he undergoing an infinite number of changes and moments? Well, no, because it's just one. So you get something that looks almost identical to Craig's view, but you're not saying it's timeless.
Yeah.
You don't have to talk in this kind of weird way of like timeless sans creation. You can just be like, yeah, God existed by himself all alone. And then the next moment is God creating a bunch of stuff.
Okay, so that seems right to me. So like you're saying, the only difference is Craig would say creation is the first moment.
Yes.
Right? But you're just saying, well, no, the first moment was what Craig would call the timeless state, but it's just kind of
I'm just
saying
it's temporal.
God existing in eternal love with the Trinity, and then the second moment is creation.
Yeah. And so people who have been working on like creation ex nihilo and like problems related to like the Kalam cosmological argument. So Andrew Loke has been doing this quite a bit, and he's got a recent paper where he points out and actually cites me saying like, yeah, Mullins' view, it's perfectly fine with the Kalam. It's like perfectly acceptable. And I was like, okay, good. So I've got one like, proponent of Kalam saying, yeah, Ryan, your view's fine. And then Craig's got a newer paper coming out where he's saying people like Alan Paget or Richard Swinburne, who affirm views very, very similar to my own. He's like, yeah, their view's totally consistent with the Kalam as well. And I'm like, okay, so now I've got two major proponents of the Kalam saying my view is perfectly consistent with the Kalam argument. So none of these infinity problems seem to be plaguing my view. Unless somebody can like sneak it in somewhere else. I don't know.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's very rare I change my mind on air, but I that sounds right to me. So I'm really happy to go with that.